like this. I look down at her eyes and I gaze lovingly into her little face. And I say, rock-a-bye baby on the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. And down will come baby, baby and all. And this seems to be a great comfort to little Lucy. And she sort of flutters her eyelids in happiness at my voice and gently nuzzles herself into my arm and goes to sleep. And as I slowly crawl back into my bed for the fourth time that night, and it's only 2 a.m., so I kind of wondered to myself what's going on in Lucy's head when she hears the words, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, baby and all. Because essentially what I'm saying to Lucy is that the thing that is going to relax you and calm you down is that you will fall out of the cradle. You will smash your head onto the floor and you will die. And so it's really interesting that we sing lullabies to our children that make no sense, that if we even just thought about them for 30 seconds, we would be shocked and amazed at the infanticide that we are singing gently into the ears of our children. And what might you call this? You might call this the lullaby effect. The lullaby effect, I think, is where we hear something so many times and we sort of just get so habituated, so used to a certain story, a certain rhyme, a certain myth, that we cease to think about it anymore and ask questions. And from my perspective, I think one of the greatest lullaby effects, one of the greatest places that we see that lullaby effect is when we learn parasha. When we learn the stories in the Torah, no greater, than the stories in Bereshit that we're currently going through, the stories in Genesis. Because many of us have heard these stories from a young age. For many of us, these stories, were things that we spoke about on rotas, on car journeys, at Shabbat tables. They were stories we might have learned at Cheder, maybe at primary school. These are stories that we've heard and heard and heard, and we ceased to think about them anymore. And so I'm very interested in learning Parsha in a new way, to chase away the lullabies of the Parsha. And that's a series that we've begun at Barnet, and then I'm going to share with you one of the sessions that actually I haven't yet given at Barnet, but we'll be giving next week, which is coming up in this week's Parsha. A lot of the material that I share from Chasing Lullabies comes from Rabbi David Foreman and his team at aleph-beta.org, which I highly recommend. And also I get a lot of material from Rav Mattis Weinberg in his Frameworks series, and a few other places as well. And I try to draw some of these strands together to produce a package that is hopefully fun, interesting, and chases away the lullabies of the Parsha. So all errors are mine, all accuracy is theirs. Go and check up their material afterwards. There are 3 types of questions that I want us to be able to ask when it comes to learning Parsha, when it comes to learning text and trying to chase away lullabies. The first type of question is an internal question. It's a question about the text itself. As an example, we go back to the Parshas Noach, we go back to the story of Noah, and it says Noah was a righteous man in his generation. But don't stop, in his generation. So there's an internal question in the text. There's something about the text itself. Why does God specify in his generation? You could have said he's a righteous man, full stop, end of story. Why in his generation? What's God trying to communicate by that additional word? So that's an internal question. And these questions can be really interesting. And they're not just questions about the text, but they're questions within the story itself. In that story, what's going on? There's another type of question, which is an external question. It's sort of a question which comes out from the text itself. So it's not about the story, it's not about the text, but like what's happening around the text. As an example, just if we can, some of us can mute for feedback and then unmute at times of interaction, that'd be great. There's just 1 or 2, I think feedbacks on the Zoom. So as an external question might be, okay, what was God's grand plan to flood the world? Because surely when God created the world, he was happy. He had a plan in mind. So what was his plan in mind if he's then going to go and destroy it? So that's a question that comes out from the story of the flood. It's not a question about the flood, it's around the flood. It's about the whole existence of the flood. How can God create a world and then destroy it? And if he is going to destroy it, why not do a full, wholehearted job? Why not entirely destroy the world? Why leave behind some last vestiges, Noah and his family, pairs of animals, all these sorts of things? Why leave them behind? Why not just start the whole thing again? So those are external questions. And just in case you do go and look at Rabbi Foreman's sort of material, he will actually make a slightly different distinction between internal and external questions. This is the distinction that I make. And then the final sort of type of question that I want to ask is a reflective question, which is not about the text in terms of what's going on inside it, not external, around the text, what's going on from the outside of the story, but how do I feel about it? And as someone who tries to spiritually connect to stories and is a psychologist and tries to see how the story touches my heart and touches my life, I want to understand what the story is doing to me. How do I feel about it? So when it comes to Noah, how do I feel about a God that is willing to destroy all life? How do I feel about a God that is moving his plans so speedily from one to the next? How do I feel about that? Does it make life fragile, precarious? How do I feel about my own vulnerabilities when faced with a flood? So those might be three different types of question that we might ask: an internal, an external, and a reflective question. I hope that we will sort of move through those three different types of question as we explore the parasha of the week. And maybe we'll begin with a question about this week's parasha Toldos, when it comes to Rivka, when it comes to Rebekah. How do you feel about the actions of Rebekah in this week's parasha? I want to open it up to you. I know we don't know each other very well yet, but I like to have an interactive session and workshop if possible. So please feel free to unmute yourself. You can hold down the space bar to temporarily unmute yourself or just click on unmute. And I just want to ask you, how do you feel? What questions do you have about the actions of Rebekah in this week's parasha? Just a 10-second recap. In this week's parasha, we have the deception and trickery, seeming deception and trickery of Isaac, the blind old husband, who is going to bless one of these children. He has twin children, Esau and Isaac, Esau and Yitzhak, and he's going to bless one of them. And he decides he's going to bless Esau. And Rivka hears this, and a plot is afoot. How do you feel about this plot?
Well, she had the power of prophecy, so she presumably knew that what she was doing was the right thing to do.
Okay. So Kenneth wants to say that. Kenneth, inherent within your statement was a certain discomfort around the deception, a certain sort of like uncertainty whether this was right or okay. But then you said, like, it's all right, she's got God on her side. So the ends, so to speak, justify the means because she had some prophecy. Okay, so we'll try and pick that apart in a minute. And anyone else, how else do people feel about this? So just a point, Kenneth, we don't always have to jump to the answer. We can sit with the discomfort in the question as well. So there is a discomfort there that we're trying to grapple with, which is, how could she do such a thing? Any other thoughts? No? Okay. So let's sort of ask a few more questions. In terms of a reflective question, Kenneth was speaking out some sort of discomfort around what she did. Well, if you had a dispute with your spouse or best friend and you wanted to kind of manage a disagreement, let's say you even had some private knowledge, some special knowledge about a situation, what would be the first avenue of engagement or intervention? Would the first thing that you do create an elaborate scheme to set something up? Probably not. What would you do instead? You'd have a conversation. You'd talk to each other. And not only would you, that's true with a best friend, all the more so with a marriage partner. Rebekah, Just go and talk to your husband. Reveal your special knowledge. You have special knowledge. And so why not talk? Why not talk? It gets even hairier, because if I was to ask you who is the one doing the deceiving, you'd probably say that it is Rebekah doing the deceiving. However, if you notice the way Rebekah sends away her son, Jacob, after this happens, she says, you have to leave until it's safe for you to come back because of your deception. Until Esau forgets what you did to him. It doesn't sound like Rebekah is seeing any deception on her part at all. Very, very interesting. Hold on a second. She's saying that Jacob is the deceiver, not her. But why? Surely she's the one. She's the architect of this grand plan of deception. And I suppose to take the point that Kenneth made is that she's got prophecy on her side. Let's just play a little experiment. Let's imagine that you are working for the Trump administration in the lead up to the 2020 election. Let's imagine. And you are part of the campaign team. And you have a dream one night. It's a very intense dream. God says, listen, I'm sending you to bring victory to the Republicans. I'm really interested in a Republican victory for whatever reason. And I'm sending you to be the champion of the Republican cause. So what I'm going to do is when you wake up, you're going to find a check for $3.4 million underneath your pillow. I've put it there, says God. I've put it there so that you can fund some extra special propaganda on behalf of the Trump campaign, because we, the God team, wants Trump to win. And we're talking about lots of bleary-eyed dreams this morning with Lucy, with the Trump campaign. So you wake up and you kind of gently reach under your pillow and there's something there. There's a check, and you pull it out, and it's in this beautiful cursive handwriting, and it says £3.4 million, Bank of God. You think you're going crazy, and you take it to the bank as soon as they open up in the morning, and lo and behold, the check doesn't bounce. The check cashes. The money is in the account, and away you go. You've got your divine mission. You've got a prophecy, no less, telling you that God wants the Trump campaign to win. And you're pushing the propaganda, and you're pushing all your efforts into this campaign until the night or two before the campaign, when you realize that actually Trump is 5 points behind in the polls in the state that you've been campaigning in that swing state, that crucial state that he needs for his electoral college vote. And your campaign manager, your campaign advisor calls you up that night, and he says, look, we're 5 points down in the polls. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look like we're going to get the votes from this state. Trump's not going to win. But he says, you know something? I've got to contact Bob in the counting office. And I think if you give him $3.4 million, I think he might be able to push us 6 points ahead artificially. He might be able to do it. And all of a sudden, that number, $3.4 million, hits you in your head. 3.4 million. That's the amount that God deposited under my pillow. That's the amount I was given. Maybe I should spend the money. Maybe I should bribe Bob, the official, and allow Trump to win. Okay, at that point, we have to stop our slight thought experiment and ask, is that true? Is that true? God said, what did God say? God said, I want you to campaign. I'm on the Republican team, let's say. I'm on the Republican team. God didn't say the ends justify the means. So at a certain point, you'd have to say, well, you know what, God? You asked me to do what I could within the realms of ethics. Fine, I did what I could within the realms of ethics. But the rest of it is up to you. You know, ultimately, you're God, you're a big boy. You can sort yourself out if you need to. So yes, Rebekah has a prophecy, but doesn't seem like a prophecy means that the ends justify the means. She still has to behave in an ethical way. And we already have a question that if we stop and think for a second, if we don't just, we're very used to this story. We're very used to this idea that it all happens. We've read the story many times. But if we stop and say, what's going on here? Why didn't they talk to each other? What is her plan? Why is she deceiving her husband? Okay, so that's the first part. That's setting the question. That's an internal question, really, but it's also this question spans many levels. It's a question in the text because the text itself doesn't seem to show Rebekah as having that deception. It seems to put the blame in Jacob's camp. It's an external question, a question that comes out from the text. How can it be that a wife would deceive her husband? Why don't they just talk to each other? Just relying on a prophecy alone isn't a sufficient answer. And it's a reflective question because I think in all our lives, we wouldn't behave like this. And this is our matriarch. None of us would behave like this. None of us would set up an elaborate scheme with someone we love and trust. We would instead have a conversation. So I want to now pull back the zoom lens. Is everyone okay with this with these questions so far? Any questions on the questions? Yeah? Okay. So I want to pull back the zoom lens a little bit, partially because I like it, and partially because it's fleshing out a theory that I think is very, very powerful. I want to tell you a little story. It's a little story from actually later on in the book of Genesis. And the story goes like this. I'm just going to share my screen with you to help share this story. We could make this into a bigger screen too. We're going to try. Can you see my screen? Is that okay? Okay. So I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, in a story involving coats and goats, there lived people who were enduring an unending mourning for a person who was not quite dead. By the way, we're in the grey boxes at the moment. And a man who lost 2 children, owing to a failure in loyalty of one son to another, who was desperately trying to hold on to his 3rd son, even though this would end the cycle. Okay, let's now flesh out that story a little bit. I'm pushing us on in the book of Genesis to a seemingly random story in the Joseph saga, a seemingly strange and weird entry into that saga. And I'm doing this for a reason, because we're going to bring it all the way back to Rebekah's deception or seeming deception, but I want to give a bit more context and a bit more excitement and in terms of building that up. Okay, so once again, there is the Joseph story. In the middle of the Joseph story, there is this strange interjection, almost, it seems, irrelevant interjection of the Yehuda and Tamar story, where Yehuda, and I will read it through in a second, Yehuda and Tamar are plunged into the Joseph story. You might have asked at that point an external question, or an internal question about the text. What is the text doing? Why would the text, in the middle of a story all about Joseph and his brothers, lead us into some sort of backwater in ancient Canaan where Judah goes off and sleeps with someone? Like, what's going on there? Why is that story part of the Joseph saga? Again, another lullaby that needs to be chased away. So let's read in. Once upon a time, in a story involving coats. What's the coat? Yehuda gave his coat as collateral payment to Tamar for her services rendered, euphemistically. This coat was later given to Judah to identify, and the language used when the coat was given over to Judah to identify, right, when Tamar was being taken out to be burned for, theoretically, for in the eyes of everybody else, violating her loyalty to the house of Judah because she got pregnant and no one knew how she got pregnant. It must be that she got pregnant from someone else, not from the house of Judah. So she was taken out, and she says, Hakeranah, please recognize this coat. So that's the language which is used to recognize the coat. And it's a story involving goats. So a goat was Tamar's fee, for which Judah offered his coat as collateral, right? So Tamar said, give me a goat if you want my services. Judah said, I don't have a goat, but here's my coat, here's my staff, here's my ring. Take these as collateral in place of in place of me giving you the money now, and I'll send the money later, and then you'll give me the collateral back. So there lived people who were enduring an unending mourning for a person who was not quite dead. Tamar was mourning for her husband, Er. Literally, if you take Er and you put it backwards, it means Ra. It says Ra, who's not fully dead. Why? He's not fully dead because his legacy had the potential to live on through Yibum. Yibum is that action whereby a brother, through an act of loyalty to another brother, when that brother has passed away without any children, the second brother marries that first brother's wife, and their children will continue the legacy of the first brother because that children will be on the name of the dead brother. And Tamar could have had a child with a surviving family member. Tamar could have had a child with Er's brother Onan, literally mourning. You got little Er, wickedness backwards. Onan mourning. And Onan also is not willing to offer up his seed to allow Tamar to continue the legacy of her dead husband. So Er is dead, and Onan is dead. And Yehuda now has lost two children, a man who lost two children. Yehuda lost Er and Onan when they died, following their relationship with Tamar. And why did they die? They died owing to a failure in loyalty of one son to another. Onan should have completed Yibum to continue his brother's name, something he was unwilling to do. And this man who'd lost two children was desperately trying to hold on to his third son. Who's that third son? Yehuda would not let Shelah marry Tamar, lest he lose another son. Even though this would end the cycle, if Shelah would marry Tamar, Er's legacy would live on through their child, and then this whole cycle would end. And that's where the story seems to hit a deadlock. That's where the story seems to hit a deadlock. Now, let me ask you, where else have you seen a story involving coats and goats, someone mourning for a son who's not quite dead? He's lost two children owing to a failure in loyalty of one son to another, desperately trying to hold on to a third son, even though this would end the cycle. Where else have you heard such a theme? Any suggestions? Any suggestions? Tashma, I need some help, guys.
Joseph,
who said that?
me, Alan Friedman.
Hi, Alan. So that's right. There's a Joseph story here. Oh, sorry. So I'm just going to return to my screen share, but come out of the slideshow, and let's do a big reveal. No, I can't do the big reveal. I'm going to stop the share one more time. Sorry, and then let's get this working. Okay, here we go. So let's do the big reveal. There is a similar story in the Joseph story. So here, that was the Yehuda and Tamar track on the right. Can you see my screen still?
Yes.
Yeah. So now we've got the Joseph and Jacob track, the Yosef and Yaakov track. Once upon a time in a story involving coats. What were the coats? Well, Yaakov gave Yosef the now famous coat, right? Made famous by Andrew Lloyd Webber and co. So when Joseph's brothers sold him, they took the coat, dipped it in blood, and gave it to Jacob to identify. And they said to Jacob two words, Haker na, please identify this coat. Where else in the entire Torah do you only ever see Haker? There's only one place in the entire Torah you see another place that you see the words Haker na, please recognize. It's only when Tamar hands over the coat and says to Judah, please identify this. Also to anyone, please identify this. It's exactly the same language used when the brothers say to their father, holding out the coat of this child, Joseph, and they say, Hakerna, can you recognize this? Can you see? Is this from your son, Joseph? And there's a story involving goats because the brothers killed a goat to dip the coat in its blood. So there lived a person who was enduring an unending mourning for a person who was not quite dead. Who's the person who was enduring an unending mourning? It was Jacob, it was Yaakov. Yaakov mourned for Joseph, for whom there was no body or burial. Now, if I remember when I was growing up in Northwest, in my primary school, Northwest, so we always, every year, used to remember, or not remember, used to collect for Ron Arad. Do you remember Ron Arad? Yeah. So Ron Arad was the Israeli, I think he was a parachuter who got captured, and we've never found his body. Right? I don't think, and we've never had his remains. And there's always that suspicion, maybe he's alive somewhere, rotting in some some Arab cell. Maybe he's alive. Maybe, and we just don't know. And there's this crippling suspicion always lurking in Jacob's heart. He doesn't have a body. All he has is a bloody coat. And so the Torah actually describes this experience of mourning as an absolute depression. He loses the ability to prophesy because he can't feel joy anymore. He is in such a chronic state of low mood that he can no longer talk to Hashem. And when he finally hears news that Joseph is alive, is the first time that he speaks to God in many, many years, because he's lifted finally out of this chronic blackness that he finds that he falls into when he's in this constant state of mourning. By the way, mourning and from a clinical perspective, mourning and depression are very close. DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which tries to define what is depression, will tell you that within 6 months of a person's passing, the same symptomology of depression will also be in the case of mourning. It's only when you have one has a complex mourning response, meaning that the experience of mourning goes beyond 6 months, that then we would say it's become a depression rather than just ordinary grief. So Jacob's grief continues and continues until it's this chronic black depression. And as a man who's lost two children, who's this person who's lost 2 children? So Jacob lost Joseph when he was sold, and then he lost Shimon when Shimon was imprisoned in Egypt. I didn't say this, by the way, but what caused who was the agent of Shimon? I didn't put it on the diagram, but who's the agent? Who was the agent that put Shimon into prison? Who was the agent that sort of brought this thing moving along? It was a masked stranger. Who was the hidden stranger? It was Joseph in Egypt. Well, who was the masked stranger in the Yehuda and Tamar story? It was Tamar herself. Tamar put a veil over her face so that her father-in-law would not recognize her. And in both cases, it's not just the costume, but actually context is everything. Judah never expects to see his daughter-in-law dressed up as a prostitute on the road. The brothers never expect to see their brother as the viceroy in Egypt. There is a huge case of mistaken identity, not just because of the disguise of the protagonist, not just because of the disguise of Tamar and the disguise of Joseph, but also because you never expect to see these people in this context. And just as a masked stranger, Tamar, is moving things along, so too a masked stranger, Joseph, is moving things along. And he's imprisoned Shimon. And so Jacob now has lost 2 sons. He's lost Joseph and he's lost Shimon. And why has this happened? It's owing to a failure in loyalty of one son to another. Shimon, as the second oldest brother, should have supported the oldest brother, Reuben, who tried to protect Joseph from the anger of the other brothers. You'll recall that Reuben was not happy with this plot, was not happy with this plan, but he was a lone voice amongst the rest. It's very difficult to be a lone voice against the rest. If Shimon, if the next oldest brother, the very one who's imprisoned in Egypt, if he had stood up with the oldest brother, and now firstborn and secondborn both reject the plan of the rest, maybe the whole sale of Joseph would have never happened. Now, this man who's lost 2 sons is desperately trying to hold on to his 3rd son. Jacob would not let Benjamin go down to Egypt, lest he lose another son. He was being asked. Joseph said, listen, bring Benjamin down, then I'll release Shimon. And we know from hindsight that then Joseph will release himself, will reveal himself. And Jacob will have all sons back. He'll have Benjamin, he'll have Shimon, and he'll even have his beloved and lost Joseph. If he only lets this son go, because if that would end the cycle. And that would end the cycle. If Benjamin were to go down to Egypt, Joseph would reveal himself and Shimon would be released and we go back to a whole family. Okay. So once upon a time, in a story involving coats and goats, there lived people who were enduring an unending mourning for a person who was not quite dead, and a man who lost 2 children, owing to a failing loyalty of one son to another, who was desperately trying to hold on to his 3rd son, even though this would end the cycle. And both stories get stuck. And it's amazing, by the way, when you look at this, the first time I learned these connections, it just makes the whole text on fire. It makes the whole story so unbelievably powerful. Because then what happens next? So just putting that slide center stage. What happens next is that there is one man for whom both stories are alive. One man who crosses, who's a protagonist in both, not in the main text of the Yaakov and Joseph track, but he's there because who is the architect of the sale of Jacob? Sorry, who's the architect of the sale of Joseph? Who's the one that brought it all about? It was Yehuda. It was Judah. He's the one that brought this about. He's the one that has forced his father into such a place. Now, what goes around comes around. Now that Judah has done this to his father, it's happening to him. Now he is the one who is enduring the story. Now he is the one who's stuck. How does Judah unstick himself? Judah unsticks himself by facing up. And when when the invitation from his daughter-in-law is offered up, please recognize this. He's willing to lower his status in the eyes of the people around him and say, yes, it was me. Tzadka mimeni. She's more righteous than me. Judah is great, not because he's consistent, but because from the fools, from the depths of shame and from the depths of failure, he's willing to stand up and say, I made a mistake, it was me. I can break a deadlock. And so how does the Joseph and Yaakov track end? It's when Judah, a man who's broken his deadlock by being willing to face this head on, speaks to another man who's in deadlock, his father, who's unable to let go of his third son. And he says to him, listen, I will take it. I will guarantee. I will be collateral for your payment. Give Benjamin to me because I will be collateral. It was a collateral that ended my deadlock. It was a collateral of a coat that forced me to face up to what was necessary. I will now be collateral for you. My existence, if Joseph tries to take Benjamin, he won't take Benjamin, he'll take me. So there, Judah ends the deadlock for Joseph and Yaakov because he faces up to his responsibility. Therefore, by the way, we asked, why is this inserted into the Joseph narrative? It's inserted into the Joseph narrative because this is the tipping point. When Judah, a man who's lost two sons and was desperately trying to hold on to a third, locked himself in to a situation. He faces up to another man who's lost two children, who's desperately trying to hold to a third and says, I will be your collateral. I will break your deadlock. Okay. It's very nice. It's very nice. This is like beautiful stuff. But I want to ask you now, pull back the zoom lens. Where else have you heard stories, a story maybe, about a goat, a coat, about two children, and a lack of loyalty between the two? Where else have you heard the antecedents of these themes?
Toldos.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where else have you heard a story of Pardon?
Cain and Havel.
Cain and Havel. So there is a medrash about a coat when it comes to Cain and Havel. That's true. But that's a medrash. There is brotherly disloyalty in Cain and Havel, and there is something that seems to run throughout Genesis is how families don't always get on so well, and how families resolve some of their issues, how marriages don't get on so well, and how marriages resolve some of these issues. Those are all definitely present in the book of Bereshit. But I think the story of goats and coats is the story in Parshas Toldos, when Isaac says, go and make me some game. And Esav goes out to get some game. And Rivka says, listen, you, Jacob, I want you to get these blessings. Go and get a goat. Go and get a goat from the back garden. Go and put on your brother's coat, and you will stand up in front of your father to get the blessing. And so if you wanted to say, I suppose if you wanted to work out why it is the Torah chooses to use the different parallels of goats and coats in the Yehuda and Tamar story and the Joseph story, if you want to ask why that's the case, so then the answer is that there's something quite intrinsic about goats and coats. It's not happenstance. These antecedents come in this story. They come in this story of Parshas Toldos. So it's now that we start to hear something, because if the antecedents are found in Parshas Toldos, then who's to blame? Where did this all come from? This came from Jacob himself. Jacob, the trickster. Jacob, the trickster. Sorry, just there's someone at the door. Jacob, the trickster, seemingly has laid the plans for his own deadlock later on. So let's now try and work out what happens, because we were saying it's not Jacob, it's Rebekah. Yet Rebekah seems to say it's Jacob. So what is going on? What was the grand plan? Okay, so this is the final part of the workshop today. I'm going to now dive back into our parsha with that framework, with that context that we've just built up. Are there any questions at this point before we continue our investigation? David?
Yes, surely Lavan was the trickster, not Yaakov. He was dealing with an arch trickster. There was only one way to deal with them.
Right, so that the Lavan story, that happens later. That happens after Jacob seemingly first tricks his father. So Jacob tricks his father, and Jacob runs away to Lavan's house, and then he gets tricked. So you're right that this tale of trickery does continue. He's not just tricked. It's not just Jacob tricking his father, and then there's not just the goats and coats later on. There's also a middle story of trickery. And if we look in the text as well, we'll see that there are linkages again. But if you want to know where it started, who tricked who first, well, Jacob tricking his father happened before Laban tricks Jacob. But yes, there's what goes around comes around. That theme seems to be present throughout the book of Bereshit.
Sounds like we're making the family of the others having a major genealogical problem.
Well, Jews are not shy of looking at foibles and looking at the foibles of our heroes as well as their attributes. Other people only say, this person was perfect. We hold them up on a pedestal. They're unimpeachable. There is nothing we can say about them. No, Judaism is quite happy, is quite content, and almost celebrates the failings of our forebears, not just so that we learn from them, because ultimately, I think, what's a real hero? A real hero is someone who's a human being. A real hero is someone who has grappled with their humanity and has had to face failure, had to face difficulty, and has nevertheless succeeded. I think that's a greater hero for me in my own life, I think, than someone who's just perfect, always perfect. And we live in a generation, I think, that sometimes settles on the perfect sits on the perfect part. You read an art scroll biography of someone. It's all the good stuff, but none of the stuff where they had to fall and fail and learn and do things differently. I thought it was a beautiful eulogy from Rabbi Binstock, from Dayan Binstock, of Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs. If you've listened to it, it talks about Rabbi Sachs's development and change, and I found that much more inspiring than just hearing about the end product. The 70-year-old Lord, leader, broadcaster. He was an amazing man, and may his memory be a blessing. But I was also so inspired to hear of his learning and his change and his development, and how he moved himself into that place. So, yes, patriarchs, yes, failings, but yes, so inspirational, more inspirational, I think. So let's find out what's going on with Rivka. What was she thinking? And if we're going to have to take a stance when we look through Parshas Toldos for the next 15 minutes, where we don't read with the end in mind. So we all know what happens in the story. We all know that there will be a deception. But if you don't read with the end in mind, if you don't read knowing what's going to happen, let's work through the text and see what might Rivka have been planning instead from the beginning. So just getting my place. So the first clue as to what was going on in Rivka's mind is that despite the fact that Rivka says that you did something, that we said that seems to be that the onus of blame is placed upon her son at the end of the story. At the beginning of the story, and let me just pull up some text so that we have it in front of us. I'll just put up Safaria for a second. So let's look at this together. It's always better to have a visual. So here we are in Safaria. I don't need to take the survey. Right. If anyone has used Safaria before, you'll know it's amazingly helpful. So we want to go to this week's parasha, which is, we want to be in chapter 27, and we want verse 8. Look how she presents it from the beginning. For Ata b'ni, now my son, Shema b'koli, listen to my voice, la'asharni matave osoch, that which I command you. It seems to be that at the beginning of this, she is the active party. She's the one telling her son what to do. Now, at the very end of the story, just to skip ahead to Pasuk 45, she says, this is what I said, quoting before, she says, leave until your brother's anger subside, v'shachach es asisa lo, and he forgets what you have done to him. So we've gone from verse 8, she telling her son what she wants him to do, to verse 45, her saying to her son that he's done something. So our first clue is that something hasn't worked out quite as planned. From verse 8 to verse 45, we've moved from Rivka being the active party to Jacob being the active party. That's key. That's clue number one to what's going on. The next clue that she is confident that this is an entirely ethical procedure that she's engaging is Jacob is not particularly happy about what might be happening. Jacob is not being quite happy about what's being happening, but she says, listen, she says, Ach shma b'koli, just do as I say, because alai kilascho, on me will be the curse. If anything happens, if anything bad happens, I will take the full responsibility. She says, be it on me. It's going to be on my response. I'll take all that needs to happen. Don't think it's all about you. It's going to be about me. Now, if she thinks that this really is deception 101, like if she thinks that she's setting up her son to deceive her husband, why would she make such a brazen statement? I will bear the full responsibility. I will take the curse. It must be, it seems, clue number 2, that she's not uncomfortable with what's happening. She doesn't think something negative is going on. And not only that, but if you look in the previous verse, if we describe what is Jacob's hesitation, he says, Ulai yimusheni avi, maybe my father's going to touch me, and I'll be to him like a trickster. Kim saseh, like a trickster. Not a trickster, like a trickster. It sounds like even Jacob doesn't think that it's going to be actual trickery. It sounds like there's a suggestion that, my father might not be so happy with what's going on. He might think I'm like a trickster, but I don't want to be, I'm not going to be a trickster. I'm not actually engaging in deception. That's clue number 3. So why is it that they don't seem in the introduction, neither Rebekah nor Jacob seem to be thinking it's real deception? Maybe it's because it wasn't meant to be real deception. What was it meant to be? What was plan A? What was plan A? Before we get to what happened in the end, before we got to the unfolding of plan B, which just seemed to fall into place, what was plan A? Well, Jacob and Rebekah had 2 children. And we're now going to skip ahead 2 chapters. We'll just go back into our screen share. We're going to skip ahead 2 chapters to the origin story of Esau and Jacob. And where is that? Verses 25 and 26. And we're going to talk about their names. The first son came out. He was all red. He was all ready. Vayikru'u Shmai Esav. Vayikru'u, that is in the form, and they called him. That is in a plural form. Who called him? They called him. Who is they? Who is calling him Esav? It's both parents. Both parents call him Esav. They call him the made one, the doer. Afterwards, Afterwards came out his brother, and his hand was holding on to the heel of Esav. Vayikra. And he called Shmo Yaakov. Who's calling his name? It's not Vayikra'u. It's not they called him. It's he called him. Now there's only one parent who's naming Jacob. Who's that? His father, Isaac. Isaac names him. But Rebekah is seemingly mute. Why is Rebekah mute? Maybe Rebekah doesn't want her son to be defined by a name which implies heel, which implies crookedness. And in actual fact, when Esau responds to Jacob and Jacob's trickery, he says, Ya'akveni ze pa'amayim, he has Jacobed me. He has crooked me out of my birthright. He's crooked me out of my birthright. He's crooked me out of the blessings. He's a crooked man. Maybe Rebekah doesn't want to name her son the crooked one. She wants him to be an Esav or have the virtues of an Esav too. A doer, someone who isn't crooked. Now we know that Esav was a tricksy person, but his name was doer. That's what the parents felt was very, very valuable about him. He was already fully made, hairy, red, and he's accomplished. He's a doer. And that's what his father says. Go out, make me a meal, be a doer, prepare it. You're the doer. You can do all these things. So if you're Rebekah and you're trying to convince your husband that your other son can also be the recipient of the blessings, what would you want your son to do? You'd want your son to go in front of your husband and stand up for himself and say, I can be a doer as well. So Rebekah says to her son, go, get some food, be a doer. Go, make a meal, be a doer, and stand in front of your father and say to him, I can also have the blessings. No trickery involved whatsoever. Demonstrate for him through your own activity that you can achieve just what your other brother can achieve. That you can also make a meal. You can also do those things and have that power. You're not the crooked son stuck in the tent. By the way, she hasn't quite left it all up to Jacob. She's told him to go and get the goat, but who's going to do the cooking? She's going to do the cooking. Okay, so already she's subtly undermining the message that she's trying to get him to say. And he's hesitant. He says, maybe I'll be like a trickster. Maybe I'll be like a trickster. What does that mean? You want me to go and stand up in front of my father. You want him to accept me. But he's going to see through it. He's going to see through this ruse. Not a ruse, he's going to see through my statements. So she says, okay, I'll boast you, I'll take the responsibility, she says. If he's upset by the fact that you've come into the room to demonstrate, to say explicitly your cause, I'll take it. But she's confident that that's not a problem, because why wouldn't her husband receive that communication? Why wouldn't her husband be okay receiving a communication from his son? I would like blessings too. So she's not making a rash comment, I'll take the curse. Instead, she's saying, I have enough confidence that this is going to happen. Again, though, subtly undermining what she wants her son to do. She wants her son to be a man, to step up, to take on responsibility, to be the doer. And what she's doing, she's saying, I'll take some of the responsibility. Again, subtly undermining it. And then finally, Jacob says, but look, he's gonna feel me. He's gonna touch me. Now, my father is gonna see through this. He's gonna see my gentle, delicate skin. He's gonna say, you're not a doer. Doesn't matter what you say. You're not the doer. She says, look, okay, if you need the confidence, put on a coat. Put on a coat, take the goat. If you need confidence to bolster your position, fine. Take a coat. Wear that too. If that's going to allow you to feel that your father can truly respect your claim that you can also be a doer, then fine. Do that as well. But what do I want? I want you to say, I, Jacob, can be a doer too. I don't want you to deceive my husband That was never the plan. Are you only going to be, you're worried you're going to be like a trickster? That's okay. Let's just bolster your confidence. Let's put on a coat. But again, what's this image of a mother putting a coat onto her son? It subtly undermines what she's trying to achieve. I want you to be the man. I want you to stand up and take responsibility, but I'm dressing you. I'm giving you food to give him. I'm preparing it for you. I'm taking the responsibility for the curses. It's not quite there. And finally, Jacob walks into that room and Isaac asks, Mi ata bani, who are you, my son? And at this point, we don't really know. Jacob doesn't really know. Am I Jacob? Am I the trickster? Am I the one who's a little bit crooked, a little bit hidden? Am I a doer? Do I feel that full confidence in my ability to take on that mantle? And then Jacob just plunges himself into a place that was never intended by his mother. He says, yeah, I'm Esau, I'm your son. I'm Esau. You can just imagine what Rebekah's doing. She's standing in the kitchen, she's standing outside, she's listening to what's going on. She smacks her head against the wall. You know, no, that wasn't what was meant to happen. You were meant to be Jacob. You are not meant to be someone else. You are meant to be standing up and demonstrating that you're not limited by this name. And instead, I'll get to you in a second off. So instead, he seems to make a deception that was never the plan. And because of that, at the end, she says, you did this, your plan, your deception. You'll have to wait until your brother forgets what you did to him. And what goes around comes around, because the goats and coats deception that was never meant to happen then comes to hit Jacob in the future with the goats and coats of Joseph, and is only taken away by one man who will stand up and break that deadlock, by his son Judah, who also, because of this trickery, also because of deception, gets stuck in that cycle. Just as a final sort of thought before I take questions, what was it that Judah needed to do? He needed to stand up and face his fears and face his failings head on. We do actually see Jacob doing that later on in life. Jacob fights the angel. Jacob faces up to his brother. There is a reconciliation, and his name is transformed from Jacob, the crooked one, to Yisrael, Yashar Kel, the straight one of God, who struggles and succeeds. Jacob does manage to rectify his own twisted legacy, but it still haunts him all the way through to his sons and his children, until finally Judah, Shimon, Benjamin, Joseph all come together as a big family with their father Jacob. And this goats and coats story seems to at least have a respite at the end of the book of Bereshit. My friends, thank you very much for chasing away the lullabies with me this morning. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you. I know that Lucy's been really happy listening in. And if you've got any questions, thoughts, and comments, they're all welcome now. Dov, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Thank you. That was really fantastic.
Pleasure.
Very nicely presented.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Enjoyable. Thank you.
Good.
Very nice.
Okay, well, have a lovely day, everyone. It was a real pleasure to see you. Hope to see you again sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Landau.
Thank you
Go.
very much.
Thank you. Also.
He was very good at he Kenny. That
Excellent. Excellent.
He was in next week, Kenny.
Rabbi Binstock.
Okay.
All right. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Take care.
Might see it then. Hopefully at 2 o'clock.
We'll see. I'm not sure I'll be there for a minute, but maybe Mari. Take care.